Erin barely glanced at me as she stepped into the hallway, dressed like she was about to make headlines. Tight dress, heels, the whole package. Not a word of explanation. She just headed for the door. The silence between us was deafening, but it wasn't anything new. Things had been tense for weeks, maybe longer. But tonight, something was different, and I could feel it. That morning, she'd said something that rattled around in my brain all day, poisoning every thought. "I'm fed up with you." Her voice was flat, colder than I'd ever heard. "You've let yourself go, Brad. Look at yourself." It wasn't the first time she'd dropped hints about my weight. I knew I'd gained some over the last year: work stress, late nights, and too many takeout meals. I wasn't blind to it, but hearing it from her like that, so bluntly, felt like a slap in the face. I mean, she wasn't perfect either, but I never said a word about her flaws. It's marriage, right? You accept each other. But it wasn't about my weight. Not really. That was just the excuse she used to justify whatever she was doing behind my back. So, she left for this party she conveniently never mentioned before. No details, no invite, just, "I need some space." She slammed the door harder than necessary, like she wanted me to feel it. I sat there, pretending like I didn't care, flipping through channels on the TV without really watching anything. But the knot in my stomach told me the truth. Something was seriously wrong. 2 hours passed, then 3. I couldn't sleep, so I stayed on the couch, phone in hand, mind racing. Where was she? What was she doing? And with who? Then, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. I wasn't snooping, just checking like I usually did when I was bored. And there it was, a photo. Erin at the party, looking way too comfortable with some random guy I didn't recognize. His arm around her waist, her head tilted toward him like they'd been close for years. I stared at that photo for what felt like hours, my blood boiling and my heart sinking at the same time. There was no way to misinterpret it. She wasn't just out blowing off steam. She was gone, at least in her mind. But this was just the beginning. The night dragged on, but she never came home. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was that picture. Her face, her smile, how she leaned into that guy like I didn't even exist. By 6 a.m., I was done pretending I'd get any rest. The sun was creeping through the blinds, lighting up the empty side of our bed, and I was sitting there like a fool, wondering how things had gotten so screwed up. Then, as if nothing had happened, she strolled in around 7. No guilt, no shame. She didn't even look tired. Her heels clacked on the hardwood as she tossed her purse onto the chair by the door. She was still wearing that same black dress, hair a bit messy, makeup smudged, but the confidence? That was still intact. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to say something. Anything. Instead, she walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and casually grabbed a bottle of water, like she was coming home from a quick trip to the store. The silence was unbearable, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. "Erin?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though my head was screaming. "Where the hell were you?" She didn't even flinch, just took a sip of water, leaned against the counter, and finally gave me this half-hearted shrug, like my question was a nuisance. "At a party," she said, her tone flat and dismissive, as if that explained everything. I felt the blood rushing to my face. "Yeah, I saw. You think I'm stupid? I saw the pictures, Erin. You and that guy. Who is he?" She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes at me like I was the one overreacting. "Oh, that's just Jake. He's nobody, Brad. A friend from work." "Just a friend?" I couldn't believe she had the nerve to stand there and act like this was no big deal. "You were all over him, and you didn't even bother to come home last night. Do you have any idea how this looks?" She looked at me, finally, but instead of any hint of remorse, she just smirked. "Brad, you're making this into something it's not." I was fed up. "You've been a wreck for months, and I needed a break. You think I wanted to come back to this?" She gestured vaguely around the room, but I knew she meant me. Her words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't even just the weight thing anymore, it was everything. She didn't care. Not about how this was tearing me apart. Not about our marriage. She'd already checked out, and here I was holding on to some fantasy that we could fix things. "So, that's it? You needed a break from me, so you go out." Flirt with some guy? And pretend like nothing happened? Like our marriage means nothing? She laughed, and the sound was cold and sharp. Oh, now you care about the marriage? Where was that when you were sitting on the couch every night letting yourself go? I'm not going to sit around and feel sorry for you, Brad. I'm done with that. Her words stung more than I'd ever admit. I stood there, trying to process what she just said, but nothing made sense anymore. How did we get here? How did we go from being in love to this? To her treating me like some inconvenience she couldn't wait to escape. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I'm not an idiot, Erin, I said, my voice tightening with anger. There's more to this. What really happened last night? She smirked again, this smug, infuriating expression like she was daring me to push her further. Believe what you want, Brad, but you weren't there. And maybe if you'd been more of a husband, I wouldn't have needed to be there either. With that, she brushed past me and walked straight to the bedroom, leaving me standing in the kitchen, seething. She didn't even try to explain herself. No guilt, no apologies, just that same careless attitude that said she wasn't afraid of losing me anymore. And in that moment I realized I wasn't afraid of losing her either. Not this version of her. The house felt like a pressure cooker after that. Erin didn't try to make things right. She didn't even bother pretending like she cared. She stayed in the bedroom for the next couple of hours, probably scrolling through her phone like nothing happened. I paced around the living room, replaying every moment in my head. Every cold glance, every excuse, every time she brushed me off like I was the problem. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the bedroom, not caring if she was ready for this or not. She was lying on the bed, her back propped up against the headboard, scrolling on Instagram, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. Are you seriously just going to sit there and pretend like this is normal? I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. She looked up from her phone, not the least bit fazed. What do you want, Brad? You're making a scene. Making a scene? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You disappear all night, come back at sunrise, and act like I'm the one losing it? What kind of sick game are you playing? Her eyes narrowed slightly, but there was still that glint of smugness behind them. It's not a game, Brad. It's reality. Maybe if you paid more attention to what's going on around you, you wouldn't be so shocked. That was it. I wasn't letting her twist this around anymore. I'm not the one ignoring reality, Erin. You're cheating. I know it, and you can't even bother to deny it. She tilted her head to the side, still eerily calm. Cheating? Is that what this is about? Because I went to a party? Wow, Brad. Pathetic. I clenched my fists. I'm not stupid. It's not just about the party. You've been pulling away for months, making excuses, treating me like I don't even exist. And then I see you all over that guy. You think I don't know what's really going on? She sighed dramatically, like I was boring her with my accusations. Fine. You want the truth? You want to know why I didn't come home last night? She stood up from the bed, standing just a few feet away from me now, her voice dripping with disdain. Because I didn't want to come home. I didn't want to come back to this, back to you. Those words hit like a sucker punch. But I wasn't backing down. So what? You spent the night with him? Is that what you're saying? She didn't answer right away, just stared at me, almost enjoying the way I was unraveling in front of her. Then, finally, she said, You're right, Brad. I did spend the night with him. Everything stopped. It was like time froze, and all the sound drained out of the room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But I forced myself to ask the next question. Did you sleep with him? She didn't even blink. Yeah, I did. It felt like the ground opened up beneath me. I didn't even know how to react at first. Part of me had expected it, sure, but hearing it out loud, from her mouth, it was like someone ripped the air right out of my lungs. For a second, I just stood there, numb, before the rage started building up inside me, hot and uncontrollable. How could you, after everything after us, you just throw it all away for some random guy? She crossed her arms, her face still emotionless. I didn't throw anything away, Brad. You did. You threw it away when you stopped trying. When you let yourself fall apart and expected me to just sit here and watch. You're blaming me? I shouted, the anger spilling out now. You cheat on me, and somehow this is my fault? She raised her eyebrows, like my outrage was some kind of amusing spectacle. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just stating facts. You stopped being the man I married. You checked out a long time ago, Brad. Don't act like you didn't see this coming. I couldn't even process her words anymore. Every single sentence felt like another stab, twisting the knife deeper into everything I thought we were. So what now? You think you can just walk away from this? From us? She smiled. A cruel, twisted smile that told me she'd already made her decision. I think you already know the answer to that. And just like that, everything we had, everything I thought we could fix, shattered. The room felt suffocating after she said it, like the air had been sucked out, leaving nothing but the wreckage of her words. I think you already know the answer to that. The way she said it, cold, detached, with that smug little smile. Like I was the fool for still holding on to any shred of hope. She had no intention of fixing anything. Aaron had moved on, and I was just the dead weight she was too tired to drag along anymore. For a moment, I stood there, frozen. The rage had morphed into something worse, something hollow and sick. My mind was racing, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. I couldn't make sense of it. How someone you thought you knew could turn into a complete stranger right in front of your eyes. She turned away, heading back toward the bed, as if the conversation was over, like she had dropped her bomb and was now done with me, done with us. But I wasn't done. Aaron? I called after her, my voice shaking, but not from fear anymore, from something darker, deeper. You don't just get to walk away from this like it's nothing. She paused, turning back to face me, arms crossed. What do you want me to say, Brad? You want me to apologize? Tell you it was a mistake? Because I'm not going to lie to make you feel better. The way she said it, with so much arrogance, so much disdain, it was like she wanted me to break, wanted me to snap. And maybe I did. Something inside me just cracked. I'm not asking for an apology, I said through gritted teeth. I'm asking you to own up to the fact that you've destroyed everything we built. You cheated, Aaron. You didn't just hurt me. You killed everything we had, and you don't even care. She looked at me like she couldn't believe I was still trying. We didn't have anything left to destroy, Brad. Let's be real. Our marriage died long before last night. You just didn't want to see it. Her words hung in the air like poison, but I wasn't backing down. If you were so unhappy, why didn't you just leave? Why drag this out? Why lie? Why cheat? Why make me think there was still something worth saving? Her expression shifted for the first time. It wasn't regret or guilt. It was irritation. Leave? And do what, Brad? Watch you spiral even further? You couldn't even handle me going to a party. You think you'd survive if I left? You'd fall apart. That was the final insult. The moment I realized she didn't just disrespect me. She had zero respect for me at all. I wasn't a husband to her anymore. I was a burden, a joke. You really think that low of me? I asked, my voice cold now, a strange calm settling over me. You think I can't live without you? She shrugged. I think you haven't given me any reason to believe otherwise. That was it. That was when everything inside me snapped into clarity. I'd been fighting for someone who didn't even see me as worth the effort. Someone who had already checked out long before I even realized it. She didn't want to fix this. She didn't want to be with me, and she wasn't even sorry for the damage she caused. You know what? I said, my voice steady now, the calm before the storm. You're right. Maybe I have let myself go. Maybe I did stop trying. But at least I didn't betray you. At least I didn't turn my back on the person I promised to stand by. You made your choice last night, Aaron. And now I'm making mine. She raised an eyebrow, her smirk returning. Oh? And what choice is that? I stepped closer, closing the space between us. We're done. Her face barely flickered. No shock, no panic, just a slight narrowing of her eyes. You're finally catching on. The smugness in her voice made my blood boil, but at the same time, there was a strange relief in saying it out loud. I was done chasing after someone who didn't want to be caught. Done fighting for a marriage that was already dead. I'll pack my things, I said, turning away from her. You won't have to deal with me much longer. As I walked out of the bedroom, her voice followed me, sharp and biting. Good. Maybe now you'll finally take care of yourself for once. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her words couldn't hurt me anymore. I was already planning my exit, already picturing a life where I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for her next betrayal. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. I was done letting her dictate my worth. She could have her freedom. She could have her Jake. But I was going to reclaim myself. And it started right now. The rest of the morning was a blur of adrenaline and disbelief. I was standing in our bedroom, staring at the closet, trying to make sense of what just happened. My hands shook as I grabbed a suitcase from the top shelf. The reality of leaving hit me all at once. But so did the feeling of freedom. Erin could have the last word if she wanted. But I wasn't staying for another second of her smug, self-righteous attitude. I started throwing clothes into the suitcase, not caring if they were folded or not. Every piece of clothing I grabbed felt like another piece of this life I was tearing away from. The life I thought I had with her was a lie, a joke, and the sooner I got out of there, the better. I could hear her moving around the house as I packed, calm, deliberate, like nothing was happening. She wasn't coming to stop me or apologize. I almost laughed at the idea. That wasn't Erin. She was letting me go without a fight because, to her, this was probably a win. No more pretending. No more dealing with the man she thought was beneath her. As I zipped up the suitcase, she appeared in the doorway. Leaning against the frame, arms crossed, still dressed in that same black dress from the night before, her eyes sharp but relaxed. "Leaving already?" she asked, her voice dripping with casual indifference, like I was just heading out for a business trip. "Yeah," I replied, my back turned as I shoved my toiletries into a bag. "I think it's time." There was a pause, then the sound of her heels clicking against the floor as she stepped into the room. "I didn't expect you to actually do it. I figured you'd sulk around for a few days, make some dramatic speech, and then try to work things out." She chuckled to herself. "Guess I underestimated you." I didn't respond. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of another argument. That's what she wanted, to keep dragging this out, to get under my skin one more time. But I was done. I'd given her enough of my energy, my emotions. All she wanted was control, and I wasn't giving it to her anymore. When I didn't answer, she sighed and took a seat on the edge of the bed, crossing one leg over the other. "So, what's the plan, Brad? You gonna run off, get a hotel, cry into a pillow for a few weeks, then come crawling back? Or maybe you'll hit the gym, lose those extra pounds, and try to win me back with some desperate grand gesture." Couldn't help it. I turned and looked at her, stunned by the cruelty in her words. She was relishing this. My pain, my humiliation. It was entertainment to her, like this whole thing was some game and she was the winner. "I'm not coming back, Erin," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And you won't hear from me again." She raised an eyebrow, a smirk creeping across her lips. "Sure, Brad, whatever you say." I shook my head, disgusted by her arrogance. She truly believed I'd come crawling back to her, that I couldn't survive without her toxic presence in my life. But she had no idea how ready I was to get out of this prison she'd turned our marriage into. I zipped up the suitcase and slung the bag over my shoulder. As I headed for the door, she called out after me, not with desperation, but with amusement. "Don't forget, this was your choice," she said. "When you realize how much you're losing, remember that you walked away, not me." I stopped for a second in the hallway, the weight of her words sinking in. My choice. She made it sound like I was walking away from some paradise, like she had been the victim all along. But in reality, I was leaving behind a twisted version of her. A woman who had long since stopped caring, who had no respect for me or our marriage. I walked out of the house, not looking back. Every step toward the door felt like shedding layers of something heavy, something toxic that had been strangling me for too long. My car was parked out front, and as I threw the suitcase into the trunk, I realized something. I wasn't sad. Not anymore. I was angry, sure. Hurt, of course. But sadness? That was gone. The Erin I had fallen in love with was long gone, replaced by someone cold, someone I didn't recognize. And the moment I left that house, I felt a surge of relief so strong it almost took my breath away. As I started the engine, I looked at the house one last time. The front door was closed, no sign of her. It was better that way. The chapter was closing, and she could stay in that house with her smug smile and her lies. I was done. I pulled away from the curb, gripping the steering wheel tightly as the road stretched out ahead of me. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet. Maybe a hotel, maybe I'd crash at a friend's place for a while. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't running in circles. I wasn't stuck in her twisted game. I was finally moving forward. And that was enough for now. The first night away from her hit me harder than I expected. I ended up at a motel off the highway, the kind of place with flickering neon lights and cigarette burns in the carpet. It wasn't much, but it felt like freedom. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cheap TV, but nothing registered. My mind was still racing, spinning with everything that had happened over the last 24 hours. I should have been devastated. Maybe part of me was, but it felt buried under layers of anger, disbelief, and this bizarre sense of liberation. I wasn't her puppet anymore. I wasn't bending over backward, trying to fix something that had been broken for far too long. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the thought, how the hell did it come to this? The silence in that motel room was deafening. My phone buzzed a couple of times, but I ignored it. Probably friends wondering where I was or checking in on me. I wasn't ready to explain the full disaster just yet. How do you tell people that your wife, the woman you thought had your back, had been lying for months, maybe years? Around midnight, I gave in and checked my messages. A couple of texts from my buddy, Dave. One from my mom, asking if everything was okay. And then, one from Erin. I stared at her name on the screen for a few seconds before I opened it. You gone for good, then? Or just cooling off? I felt a wave of anger wash over me. Cooling off? The audacity she had to send that after everything she'd admitted to. She acted like I was just throwing a tantrum, like I'd be back any minute, tail between my legs. She didn't think I had it in me to leave her for real. I guess she thought I was that weak, that predictable. I tossed the phone onto the bed, not bothering to reply. Let her think what she wanted. I wasn't cooling off. I was done. The hours ticked by, and I found myself thinking about how things used to be. How we were when we first got married. Erin used to be the kind of woman who lit up a room when she walked in. She was sharp, funny, and full of energy. We had fun together. We laughed a lot, and I genuinely believed we'd have each other's backs through anything. That's the person I'd fallen in love with. But somewhere along the way, things changed. We both did, I guess. I wasn't perfect, far from it. Maybe I had let myself go a little. Gained some weight, got caught up in work, stopped being that exciting, spontaneous guy I used to be. But I never stopped trying. I never betrayed her. That's the difference. She didn't just change. She checked out. By 2 a.m., I was too restless to stay in that motel room. I needed air, needed to think. I grabbed my jacket and went for a drive, the kind where you don't know where you're going but you just need to keep moving. I ended up at a park on the edge of town, one of those places we used to go when we first started dating. The parking lot was empty, just me and the night sky. I sat there, staring at the swings that were swaying gently in the wind. Memories of us laughing together, pushing each other on those swings, flashed through my mind. Back then, everything had seemed so simple, so damn good. It was crazy to think how fast it had all crumbled. I thought about what Erin had said earlier, how she didn't want to come home to this. To me, that stung in a way I hadn't let myself feel until now. The weight thing was just an excuse. It wasn't about my size or my habits. It was about her not wanting to be in this marriage anymore. And she didn't have the guts to say it until she'd already found someone else. That guy, Jake. His face flashed in my mind, and I felt the familiar burn of anger. He wasn't the first. I realized that now. There had been others, maybe not physically, but emotionally. She'd been pulling away for months, and I'd been too wrapped up in my own world to see it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. The truth was, I'd been fighting for something that didn't exist anymore. Erin wasn't the woman I fell in love with, and I wasn't the guy she needed anymore. Maybe she never really loved me the way I thought she did. Maybe we were just playing roles that stopped making sense. I leaned back in the car seat, staring up at the stars. The park was so quiet, it felt like I was the only person on Earth. And in that moment, I let it sink in. This was the end. There was no going back, no fixing this, no dramatic reunion where everything magically gets better. I'd lost her, But she'd lost me, too. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I realized I was okay with that. She could keep her lies, her smug attitude, and her twisted version of the truth. I didn't need to be part of her game anymore. I had my life back. It was broken and messy right now, sure, but it was mine. And that was something she could never take away from me again. By the time I got back to the motel, the sun was just starting to creep over the horizon, casting this dull, gray light across the empty parking lot. It was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time in what felt like days, I wasn't fuming with rage or drowning in my own thoughts. I was just still, exhausted, emotionally drained, but strangely calm. I sat in the car for a minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dingy motel sign flickering above me. This was rock bottom, wasn't it? A crappy room, my life in pieces, my wife, ex-wife, mentally if not legally, probably sitting at home, smirking to herself, thinking she'd won. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Erin hadn't won. Not even close. She thought she had all the power, thought she was walking away unscathed. But the truth was, I was walking away too, just from something different. I was leaving behind the version of myself that had spent too long trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed, the guy who kept bending and breaking to please someone who didn't give a damn. Erin's greatest weapon wasn't just her lies. It was the way she made me feel like I was the problem, and I was done with that. I took a deep breath and finally got out of the car, the cool morning air hitting me like a wake-up call. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, went back into the motel room, and collapsed on the bed, fully clothed. I stared at the ceiling, my mind surprisingly blank. No more obsessing over the details of what she'd done. No more replaying every fight, every cold look. What was the point? She'd made her choice, and now I was making mine. That's when I felt my phone buzz again. This time I wasn't planning to ignore it. I knew it was Erin before I even checked. Sure enough, there was her name, glowing on the screen. "So, what's your next move?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Her tone, even through text, was as cocky as ever. She still thought she had control, still believed I'd come crawling back, or worse, that I'd wallow in my own misery, waiting for her to decide when she was done with me for good. But that wasn't happening. I wasn't the guy she could string along anymore. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I got up, grabbed a shower, and finally had a real look at myself in the mirror. Yeah, I'd changed, gained some weight, lost some of the spark I used to have. But that wasn't permanent. I could fix that. And not for her. For me. I was tired of being the guy she walked all over. Tired of letting her mess with my head. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life as the broken man she left behind. I was ready to start over. I'd lose the weight, I'd get back in shape, but not because she thought I wasn't good enough. I'd do it because I was ready to be the best version of myself again. And she had no part in that. Finally, I sat back down on the bed and opened her text again. My fingers hovered over the screen, and I thought about how I wanted to end this. No long explanations, no begging for closure, just the truth. My next move? Living my life. Without you. I hit send and tossed the phone on the bed, feeling lighter than I had in days. Maybe she'd laugh at that. Maybe she'd roll her eyes and send some snarky comeback. But it didn't matter, because for the first time in months, I was in control of what happened next. Not her. And that was all the power I needed. As the morning sun streamed through the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. Peace. I wasn't carrying the weight of her betrayal anymore. I wasn't letting her words get to me, wasn't holding on to hope that things could be repaired. I was done, and there was no going back now. The phone buzzed again. I didn't bother checking it this time. Instead, I stood up, threw my jacket on, grabbed the keys and walked out of the room. I had a new day in front of me, a new life to build, and I wasn't wasting another second of it on her. That morning felt different. For the first time, I wasn't dragging myself through the motions, weighted down by thoughts of Erin and her betrayal. It was like a fog had lifted. The sun was brighter, the air felt cleaner, and the world seemed to stretch out before me, full of possibility. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but that didn't scare me anymore. There was no plan yet, but there was freedom in that. I was no longer stuck in the vicious cycle of trying to fix things with someone who didn't even want to be fixed. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for her next lie, her next excuse, or her next cold, indifferent smile. As I drove away from the motel, I passed through the old parts of town, places Erin and I used to hang out when things were good. I thought I'd feel a sting of nostalgia, maybe even a pang of regret. But the more I looked at those places, the cafe where we had our first date, the park where I proposed, I realized they didn't hurt anymore. They were just places, empty now. The meaning I'd attached to them had disappeared with her confession. What was left behind was just me moving forward. I pulled into a quiet diner a few miles outside of town, the kind of place you could get lost in for a while, away from everything. I ordered breakfast and sat by the window, watching the cars pass by. In the back of my mind, I knew Erin would be texting again, maybe even calling, trying to bait me into another round of her twisted games. But I wasn't checking my phone. Not today. Halfway through my meal, it buzzed, and I gave in to curiosity. Not because I cared what she had to say, but because I was ready to hear whatever venom she'd spit and let it bounce right off me. I opened the message and sure enough, it was her. Funny, you say you're done, but you still haven't filed for divorce. Guess you're not as ready to move on as you think. Typical Erin. Always testing, always pushing to see how much she could get away with. But this time, it didn't get under my skin. I wasn't playing her game anymore. She could bait me all she wanted. The outcome wouldn't change. I was already gone. I tapped out a quick reply, my fingers steady. No emotion, just facts. The papers are coming. And once they do, you'll never hear from me again. Her response came almost instantly, like she was waiting for it. Sure, Brad. We'll see about that. I shook my head, chuckling to myself. She didn't get it. She still thought she had me wrapped around her finger, like I'd crumble under the weight of her last words. But I was already miles ahead of her, emotionally if not physically. Filing for divorce wasn't a threat. It was a promise. I was reclaiming my life, and she could stay in whatever toxic mindset she needed to justify her actions. I paid for my breakfast, left a good tip, and walked out of the diner with a clearer head than I'd had in months. My phone stayed in my pocket the whole time. Erin's words were just noise now, the remnants of a life I was shedding with every step. I wasn't turning back. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in ages. I went to the gym. Not for her, not to prove a point, but for me. For the guy I used to be before everything got so heavy, so tangled in her lies. I needed to feel that burn in my muscles, the rush of adrenaline, the sense of control over my own body and mind. And as I lifted weights, feeling the strain and the release, I realized something. I wasn't broken. Not anymore. The anger, the heartbreak, the confusion. It was all still there, but it didn't own me like it had before. I wasn't defined by her cheating, or her cold words, or the wreckage she left behind. I was building something new now from the ground up, piece by piece, step by step. And for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the future. As I left the gym, drenched in sweat, I checked my phone one last time. No more messages from Erin. No calls. Just silence. And I was okay with that. In fact, I welcomed it. I took a deep breath, looking up at the sky, feeling lighter than I had in years. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and pink, like the universe was signaling the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. This was it. The clean break. The fresh start. I didn't know where this road would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was moving forward. Without her. Without the weight of the past dragging me down. And that was all I needed.